Cincinnati, what a team, what a team, what a team. Each man and lady, from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.
Hey, Reds fans. I'm here with Randy Freaking. This is Jack Greiner, and we're presenting our We Love Our Team podcast. And today we're honored to have as our guest Betsy Ross. Besides being an Emmy Award-winning journalist, Betsy is president of Game Day Communications, a sports and entertainment communications firm based in Cincinnati and founded in 2002. As one of the first women to break into national sports news, Betsy has recently worked as an anchor at ESPN for 5 years. Before anchoring SportsCenter and ESPN News, Betsy worked at NBC News Channel and Cincinnati's NBC affiliate WLW-TV. In October of 2010, she published her first book titled Playing Ball with the Boys, The Rise of Women in Men's Sports, which was released to a national audience. She teaches a master's level course, Sports and PR at Xavier University, and most recently taught a sports journalism course in the media school at Indiana University. She earned her bachelor's degree from Ball State and a master's at the University of Notre Dame. So welcome, Betsy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. This is always fun to talk about the Reds.
I think we decided off camera that you and I both have some Notre Dame in our background, but I think you were there a little bit before I was there. But we were talking a little bit about your experience with the Harry Oliver field goal. I gotta ask you about the Harry Oliver field goal. I'm sure we got a few Notre Dame fans listening to this. So.
Oh my word, that was of so many thrilling games that I've seen at Notre Dame Stadium. That certainly was one of them, and it's kind of cool because I'm teaching a class at Notre Dame this semester.
Wow.
It's called Game Day Media. Believe it or not, I had nothing to do with the name of the class, but it's called Game Day Media, and I've got a lot of student athletes in there because the whole idea is to teach them how to do play-by-play, how to do color analysis, how to do podcasts. So if they want to stay in their field, whatever sport they play, if they want to stay in it, they can continue in broadcasting. But the Harry Oliver game was one of these games that, it is legend. It truly is legend. It was Notre Dame and Michigan. They hadn't played for a while. And so they were renewing, that whole rivalry. And it was a tough game. They were both nationally ranked. Every time Michigan scored, Notre Dame would score, then Michigan would score, and Michigan scored with, like a minute and a half left, or it was very close to the end of the game. Notre Dame got the ball and they drove down, and time was running out, and all they had was a field goal try. And I was fortunate enough, I got to know Harry Oliver later on because he was a Cincinnati boy. And so I met him and I talked to him a lot about it. And of course, you can't talk to Harry Oliver without talking about the game. And he said, yeah, so my dad had to walk out of the stadium. He couldn't stay there to watch it. But the legend is that the wind, and it was one of those windy September days, and the wind stopped. I swear to you, the wind stopped when he kicked that field goal, and it just barely made it over the crossbar, and the place went nuts. It was just so special. And of course, we lost Harry Oliver a few years ago, and I went to the services, and of course, a lot of his teammates were there. And when we left the church, as we left, you looked up at the entrance door, and they had a huge print, a huge photograph of him making that field goal for that game. And of course, we didn't see it walking in, but
Right.
We saw that picture walking out, and it was just, it just meant everything to us who were fans and friends of his, because that game truly meant a lot to him and his family and all the Notre Dame family.
So I traded my ticket to that game for another ticket so my wife could, my then girlfriend, now wife, could come up. So I missed the Harry Oliver game because of love, Randy, because ain't love
come on,
grand.
Jack. Ain't love grand.
Ain't love grand. Well worth it. Well, you grew up in Reds country, right, Betsy?
Right, in Connersville, Indiana, about 40 miles away. And we got Cincinnati television, and so we were Reds fans, and it was always a big deal to come to the big city of Cincinnati to go to a Reds game, and you only made one, maybe two Reds games a year, just because, it's a drive and a drive back, and you had to make sure that, you had time to come down. But it was always very special when we came down. Usually it was around my mother's birthday. My mother's birthday was in September. And so, you'd come in and back then, usually that the Reds were in the race. And so you have September games and they meant something. And so it was always a lot of fun to come down. And I managed to make it to Crosley Field before they tore it down. So I was so happy that I made it to the tail end of Crosley Field before they moved to Riverfront.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Your mom was a fan, and that was her birthday present to come down for, huh?
Yeah, and it was always a lot of fun. And I just remember, because you're watching these games, you're watching it on black and white television back then, right? And that was back when you had one game of the week. It was Dizzy Dean, and it was usually the Yankees and somebody, or Detroit and somebody, but every once in a while the Reds would be on there, and then there were local broadcasts that you got to watch the Reds, and I just remember the thing that hits you when you walk up that ramp was like how green the grass was, because we're used to seeing black and white and shades of gray, and the grass was so green, and the uniforms were so white, and I think they were still wearing the pinstripes, and the white of the uniforms and the red of the numbers, and just those colors just kind of hit you, and really made it such a special event that you got to see this in person.
Did you have a favorite player when you were younger?
Oh, I think we all grew up, the bench and Perez and Pete. I mean, I played infield in softball because of Pete. And so, so many of us, those are the players that we grew up watching. And so, you tried to play the game like they did, but those were, days that we probably won't see that often anymore, that you had one player like a bench that stayed with that club the entire career. It happens every once in a while, but not like it did. And it means so much to the fans to have a player that they can follow. They can follow their career all the way through, instead of they're here for 2 years and gone. They're there for 2 years and then they go somewhere else. I know it's a business, and I know I'm being Pollyanna-ish, but you wish that there were more that could stay with the clubs, just because the fans have such a connection to players over the years.
Well, you mentioned watching the games on TV maybe once a week. How about on the radio? Did you ever get a chance to listen on the radio?
Oh yeah. Of course, that was even the days of Wade Hoyt, maybe listening to him. And as you know, you couldn't wait for a rain delay just to hear him tell stories, which was the best thing about it. But, I was one of these kids. I had the little Zenith transistor radio, and I would listen to games, on the weekends. Like, we'd go shopping, and we'd be in the grocery store, and I'd have my transistor radio, and people would ask me, what's the score? Because they could tell I was listening to the game. And that was the interest of the Reds back then. I mean, everybody was following the Reds. And so, yeah, I was one of those geeks with the transistor.
I tell you, the connection that people develop with certain people is fascinating. I went to the induction ceremony in 2000 when Tony Perez was inducted, and Sparky was inducted, and Carlton Fisk was also one of the inductees, and it was amazing. It seemed like every other person you ran into up there in Cooperstown was either somebody from Cincinnati or somebody from Boston. And, it was funny because Sparky managed the Tigers for probably twice as long as he managed the Reds.
Right.
And Fisk played for the White Sox longer than he played for the Red Sox. But we just had that connection. Sparky was kind of one of our guys, and Fisk was a Boston guy all the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sparky Anderson was such a nice gentleman. And years ago, Connorsville has this really nice little league complex, and one year they had the World Series there. Or one of the age group World Series, obviously not the Williamsport, but they had one of the age group World Series. And one year George Foster came and spoke, but this particular year it was Sparky who came and spoke, and I was there, and I got to throw out the first pitch, and Sparky was catching it. And I had practiced and I was all ready to go, and I got on the mound. And I said, what if I hit him in the face, hit him in the nose, hit him in the head? I'm going to be blamed for killing Sparky Anderson if I throw this ball and if he doesn't catch it. And I freaked out, and I pulled up and I bounced it. But I said, you know what? I am not going to be blamed. I am not going to be blamed for hurting Sparky Anderson. I will not do it. So yeah, I pulled up at the last second because I thought, what if I hit him? What if I give him a black eye? So yeah, I couldn't do it.
Betsy, did your parents play sports at all, or how much of an influence did they have on your love of sports?
Well, it was my mother who really instilled her love of sports to me. She loved the Reds. She loved baseball. She loved football. We would sit there and watch football on New Year's Day when it was 4 back then. It was 4 bowl games, and we would sit there from the Cotton Bowl, the first one, all the way to the Orange Bowl at night. My dad would go hunting, and Mom and I'd sit there and watch games. But yeah, I remember her talking about when she was in grade school and high school that she played softball, and like one of her fingers was a little bit crooked because she was trying to catch the ball and it hit her finger the wrong way and kind of bent it, and she still had that. But she was the one who really loved sports and really appreciated sports, and not only what it meant to a community, but really the skill level that it took to be an elite athlete. And there's nothing that brings a community together like sports. We saw it most recently when the Bengals made their run. Nothing brought this city together like that. And we were out in LA that week before doing media work before the Super Bowl, and I kept saying, do we have to play the game? Do we really have to play the game? Because everybody was in such a good mood, and they were so happy, and they were talking about how wonderful Cincinnati is. And we were talking to all these former Bengals about how cool this was that they were back and all this stuff. I go, can we not play the game? But we did. So
we did.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. I went to that game, and I kept running into my Western Hills friends, Bill O'Connor and Dan Murphy and Tom Neff, all those guys. And all these Cincinnati people were out there. It was really incredible. And the hotels were filled with Cincinnati people because, of course, the LA fans, they were just staying in their homes.
Right.
So the hotels were all filled with Cincinnati people, and they were all right by the airport. Mm-hmm. It was great. How about
awesome.
What got you into journalism?
I had always loved books, and I always loved reading. And I just remember, how kids these days will watch the movie Frozen 17 times straight, and it's brand new to them every time. I was like that with books. I would read a book over and over and over again, and then Mom had to extend the checkout at the library so I could read it 2 or 3 more times. I just loved reading, and I think that had to do with, we lived out in the country. It wasn't a neighborhood or anything, so there weren't a lot of kids around. And so reading takes you anywhere you want to go. And when I read books, it opened up, different worlds and different experiences. And I just loved that. I love the ability to be able to pick up a book and, in a couple of minutes, you're immersed, you're somewhere else. So I always loved books. I always loved reading and writing. And I just thought that it would just be so cool to have that as a job, that you could actually write words down and that would be your job, and that would be so cool. And so I always gravitated to that. I always say I was so fortunate. In the 6th grade, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be a reporter. Knew I wanted to be a writer. Of course, the form that it took It was certainly different now than it was in the 6th grade. I mean, nothing changes quicker, I think, than communications. And so I didn't know where that was going or how it was going to manifest itself, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to write. I wanted to be a journalist. I remember watching news conferences, and the president would call on reporters by their first name. And I thought, if I'm a reporter, the president will know my name. What? Are you kidding me? So, this is how your 6th grade mind goes. But if I'm a reporter, the president's going to know my name. And so that didn't necessarily happen, but it was just something that I always loved. I always loved writing. When I was in 6th grade, I wrote a letter to the editor for our local newspaper, and I saw my name in print, and I go, oh, this is it. This is it. And I, in one of my classes, I can't remember which one, but one of the assignments was go interview somebody. Didn't matter who, interview them. And so most people interviewed their brother or their mother or somebody in their family. And I go, I want to interview Candace Murray. And Candace Murray was our little gossip columnist in our Connersville News Examiner. And Candace Murray would tell you who was getting married and what that building was that was going up and, who's having a sale and that kind of stuff. So went up to the News Examiner, waited till Dad got home from work, drove back uptown to Connersville. She stayed late, because it was probably 6 o'clock, after 5 o'clock, certainly by the time we got back up to town and went to the News Examiner. She stayed late. And I walked into that newsroom, and it was like one of these 1930s newsrooms that you see in the movies. And it's just big old heavy desks, and desks are like piled with photos, and they're piled with papers, and there's like a couple of ashtrays in there, and it smelled like grease pencil, and it smelled like ink because they printed it right downstairs.
Oh, wow.
And I said, this is great. I mean, everybody's desk was just like piled with stuff, and there was no order in anything. And I go, this is it. These are my people. And it was just so great. And, I did this interview with Candace, and she was just so gracious about talking about getting her start writing and things like that. But that's what I knew that's what I wanted to do. And again,
somehow you merged that with your love of sports.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was something that I really didn't think it was possible, because I didn't see anybody who looked like me who was covering sports. I mean, you didn't see women covering sports. And in fact, the first woman that I remember seeing covering sports was Phyllis George. And Phyllis George was part of the team on NFL Today. And NFL Today, I mean, we look at it now, and pregame shows leading up to the 1 o'clock kickoff, pregame shows start at 9. And, on Super Bowl Sunday, they start at 7 in the morning and go all the way. Well, back then, we forget that, the lead in was like maybe 15 minutes. Maybe it was like 5 minutes leading up to kickoff. I mean, there was not a big pregame show. So NFL Today was really the first really big pregame show. And it was Irv Cross and Jimmy the Greek and Brent Musburger and Phyllis George. And every week, Phyllis George would do an interview. She'd do a feature on one of the players. And most of the time it was Dallas Cowboys, because A, she's a Texas girl, and B, Dallas was on, so much back then. But that was the first time that I saw someone who looked like me, who was doing journalism. And I thought, that's how I can put it together. That's how I can be involved in sports and be a journalist. And so, it didn't happen right away, again, because there were so few women. But, as I went along in my career, I would volunteer to help out the sports department, because sports department was, and probably always will be, undermanned, understaffed. And so they didn't care who you were. If you volunteered to help them, they'd take your help. And so I got a lot of experience when I was in graduate school, just volunteering for the South Bend Tribune. When I got into television, I would volunteer to help out the sports departments. And that's how I really got a lot of my experience. But, I didn't really get to do that full time until later on. And I was so thankful. I got to interview Phyllis George a couple of times during my career, and when she was still with NFL Today, and I was so glad that I had an opportunity to tell her how important that was for that little girl to see somebody who looked like her doing what she wanted to do. There's power in that. There is power in that. And so, when I saw that, it became reality. I was never going to be Miss America, but I can be a journalist and I can do sports. And so she was really the one who gave me, the idea that you could put two and two together. And of course, we lost Phyllis George right during COVID, and that hit me harder than I thought it would. Wow. I was surprised how hard that hit me. I got connected to her by a mutual friend that I went to Ball State with. And Vicki texted me, she said, "Oh, they're streaming her service live. You've got to watch the service. It's just really beautiful." I couldn't do it. I could not do it. Just because were we friends? No. Did we email back and forth? Yes. Is she in my book? Yes. But what she meant to me in my career, it really meant something. And it hit me harder than I ever thought it would. But she really helped me visualize that I could do this.
And these famous athletes would maybe call on you during press conferences or something by your first name.
The only person who did that was Brian Kelly when he was at UC football. He would call on me by my first name. That and Marvin Lewis. Marvin Lewis would do that too. So.
Wow.
I think you were at ESPN when Joe Morgan and John Miller were doing Sunday night baseball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And since Joe's a Reds icon, I wonder if you could tell us anything about Joe Morgan or your interactions with him at all.
It's funny because I was in Bristol, and the people who are out on the field, you might not ever see them. Sometimes they had like a once a year meeting in Bristol that everybody would come in, but I never got to see John Miller and Joe in person. Now I worked with Ray Knight. And I worked with Rob Dibble. They were in Bristol, and I have a cute Rob Dibble story. So Rob Dibble, what they would do, like when I was at ESPN, I started out in ESPN News, and then I would do Sports Centers on the weekend, and go back and forth. So when anybody came in new to ESPN, they'd put them on ESPN News. A, because not that many households had ESPN News at that time, and B, because it was kind of a safe place that they could kind of break them in, get them used to the studio, get them used to the anchors asking them questions and things like that. So Rob Dibble, he's with us maybe twice a week on ESPN News, and he'd come in and give us a preview of that night's games and things like that. And so there was one particular day that they were going to pull him off ESPN News, and I was anchoring that night, and they were going to pull him off ESPN News, and they were going to have him do like Sports Center or the MLB Tonight, Baseball Tonight show. And we had him like all scripted and ready to go. And the producers came in and said, "No, he's not going to do news. We're going to send him to whatever other show." And Rob Dibble said, "Wait a minute." Said, "These people took me in on ESPN News. They helped me learn the business. They've walked me through all the wacky things that go on behind the scenes. They've helped me really get used to being a broadcaster." Said, "No, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to do my ESPN News hit." And I thought, hallelujah. That was it was so unexpected because, most people say, "Yeah, I'm out of here. I'm going to SportsCenter." But he said, "No." Said they respected me when I had no idea what I was doing. They have helped me to really learn this business. So no, I'm going to stay here and I'm going to do this ESPN News hit.
And here he was he was one of the nasty boys, allegedly, right?
And from then on, I just had the ultimate respect for him that he would do that he would stay with us, with our broadcast, and do that. And it was great. And Ray Knight's awesome. I mean, man, he didn't have a whole lot of love for for the management, front office management for the Reds at
Yeah.
that particular time. So I always laugh at. I've gotten to know Nancy Lopez throughout the years, and I said, Nancy, I said, I've worked with two of your three husbands. And the first one was Tim Melton. He was a sportscaster that came in. He was at Channel 9.
Yeah, I remember him.
And so that was her first husband. And her second husband was Ray Knight. And she's married to a businessman from Florida now. I said, yeah, I've worked with two of three of your husbands.
That's funny. Well,
she didn't have a lot to say about that either.
Yeah, right. Well, it must have been a big deal to get the offer from ESPN. I imagine. I mean, that just had to sort of validate a lot of what you had done and what you.
Well, it was one of these things that they were launching ESPN News, and as you all know, sportscasters on a local basis, they have 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and that's all they have. Well, at ESPN News, you anchored a half hour or an hour at a time. I mean, it was basically CNN for sports. I mean, you were on constantly.
Yeah.
And so they were looking for people who knew sports, but also had that kind of anchoring background that they could anchor a half hour or an hour at a time. And when they were getting ready to launch ESPN News, I was doing work for NBC News Channel. It was 1996, and it was the Olympics year. And so I was doing a lot of work for NBC News Channel. I was covering the diving championships. I was the Olympic championships. I was covering the gymnastics Olympic trials. I was covering a lot of the Olympic sports getting ready for the Atlanta Olympics. So I had a bunch of sports on my resume reel. And so, they saw my experience in sports, and then they knew, because I anchored news, they knew that I could do that long format anchoring. So it was just kind of a perfect storm that it worked out, that they were looking for people who could anchor in a news format, but instead of news content, it was sports content. So,
well, you were anchoring when Ken Griffey Jr. joined the Reds, I think.
I was, and I was. It was when Mike and Mike were on the radio, and I kept telling Greeny, I said, you have got to broadcast from Cincinnati that day. You have to broadcast from Cincinnati that day. They didn't. They had, it was more of a sponsor thing than anything else. But I took the day off and came back for that game. I think that was such a landmark game and a landmark day for fans of the Reds to have Junior come back.
It was phenomenal. Just watching him run out to center field when that game started, it was just a incredible thrill. Was it hard to sort of keep your, obviously you had to be objective. You couldn't really display your affinity for the Reds or for the Bengals, I guess, while you were doing your stuff. Is that tough, or is that just kind of come with the territory?
Oh, I think that they would forgive you if you would be a little more enthusiastic about a Reds highlight or a Bengals highlight. It's not quite as strict as if you were doing news. You can kind of show your affinity. Everybody knew I was a Notre Dame graduate. Everybody knew I was from Cincinnati. It wasn't a big secret, and right. There's so many. And I'm sure it's still the same way now, but there are so many of both behind the scenes and on the air. I mean, they're from everywhere. I mean, our anchors on the class that I came in with on ESPN News, I mean, they were from California, and they were from St. Louis, and they were from Florida, and they were from Texas, and they were just from everywhere. And so it was a nice conglomerate of fans, because you're not going to be a sports anchor, a sports reporter, if you're not a fan. So right. You're going to be a fan of somebody, of some team. And we all kind of knew it. And, it was just one of these things that you could show your bias a little bit when it was in a positive manner. When you're doing a Reds or a Bengals, they probably wouldn't have liked it if I if I did Steeler highlights and said something nasty about the Steelers, although I might be thinking of it, but you can't say that.
Are there any particular Reds teams or moments or players that you have particularly fond memories of?
Oh, I think that anytime that you get to go to opening day, it's always a special day. And not everybody gets to go to opening day. And I've been fortunate to be able to go to opening days either, as a fan or working them. And, that's probably still my favorite moment of the whole season is you go in there and it's opening day and, hope springs eternal, literally. Everybody is happy. Everybody is so glad to have baseball back. It's, everybody's just in a good mood. And that has always been such a special day for me because it really brings out the fans. Of course, the next game that they play, there's 5,000 people there instead
Right.
of a full house. Those are the real fans, the 5,000 who come back. But, for those of us who have been there at opening day and sat there in snow and hail and sideways rain and bees and everything else, opening day for me is just the greatest moment of the entire season when you get to be there. When I had left Cincinnati and came back to work for Channel 5, my first my first interview that I did at Channel 5, I was on the field for Game 1 of the World Series in 1990, and I was with Norma and Jerry. And, I'll never forget that because, oh my word, here I am. I'm on the field and it's the World Series. How cool is this? I think that those moments really are kind of pinch me moments that, you've always listened to opening day. You've always watched it on television, and not everybody gets that privilege to be able to go to opening day. And so I still get chills when I get to be there at the ballpark.
Cincinnati's favorite non-religious holiday.
That's true. That's true.
I was at the opening day. Gosh, it's been more than, it might be 15 years now or so, when Joe Randa hit the walk-off home run to win the game. And I was so excited, but I had a client that was anxious to talk to me about something. And I just sort of put him off during the game, and then finally leaving Great American, and I am so pumped up. And I'm just like, oh, this was so great. Joe Randa just hit a home run. It's a walk. And he's totally uninterested in it at all, and really was not happy that I was, frittering away my afternoon in a baseball game. But
and wasn't that extra innings, if I remember correctly?
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was. So I'm sure he was just impatient for my phone call back. But it's funny with ESPN, and that's the other one. I represented ESPN a number of years ago in a public records dispute that they had with Ohio State, and I think, Betsy, it was the first time my two sons were actually kind of impressed with me. It was, it took a long time, but when I showed them, hey, here's this phone call from Bristol, Connecticut, they're actually like I had actually made it. I'd made something of myself,
860 area code.
Now, is there any other? I really wonder. Maybe maybe you've had some experience in other markets and other locations, but I do feel like opening day in Cincinnati is still kind of unique. I'm not sure that
absolutely
anything else compares with it, really.
Absolutely, it is, and it's just one of these things. Like you said, it is an unofficial holiday, and it should be a holiday probably, but it's just such a special, and I think that Finley Market Parade makes it that way as well. But other cities in opening day, they just kind of like open up the gates and say, "Hey, come on in." I mean, there is nothing like this celebration. And we were just in a meeting at Fox 19 planning all the coverage of opening day and everything that's going to go on this season. And it's just, I think one of these seasons, and we haven't felt this in a while, that there's a lot of optimism. This time last year, you can't say that many of us were very optimistic about what was going to happen.
Right.
And this young group of players really, really made us believers. And they were fun, and they were having fun. We were having fun watching them. We saw stars being born. We saw this team really come together. And, everybody kind of held their breath that no one was sure whether that was going to last or not, because it's only so far that adrenaline's going to take you, and then you make your way, the second time around the league. Okay, now they've seen you, and now they know what you hit, and now they know what you don't hit, and now they know a little bit about your pitching. And so, the second time around, the league kind of caught up to them. But boy, that was so much fun in the middle of June and July. They were just scorching, and it was fun. It was cool to go to the ballpark.
It really was, and it will be this year. I think, you said that we're optimistic. We're always optimistic on opening day, but this year maybe we've got reason to be. So.
Well, and it's the injury bug. I mean, you think you've got Green and Lodolo, and you're going, wow. I mean, that's like Spawn and Sane and Pray for Rain, and you've got those two, and then of course the injury bug and all this stuff happens, and you think that if they would have been healthy, especially during that stretch, what would have happened? And, it's pitching. And it was so good to see the Reds really invested in pitching in this off season.
Yep.
And so they have a nice stable of arms. And I think that this is one of these years that we're going to see those young players really mature. We're really going to see them come together. And I think that it's going to make such a big difference as they move forward. Maybe not necessarily this year, but the year after and the year after, to try to keep that core together.
Right.
And, see what they can do. I mean, let them grow up together. Let them get to know each other. Let them feed off each other. No, Joey Votto is not there, but okay, somebody else is going to be that leader on the field. And somebody else is going to be the one who steps up and really organizes them. But I think it'll be fun to see this group grow up together, not just this year, but the next year and the year after, and who knows what could happen.
Amen.
Maybe you can get Joey on Fox 19 that day if he's not signed with a team.
Now, isn't that something? And it's not like he's been shy about, hey, hello, I'm here. Anybody want to sign me? He hasn't been shy about it. And
no,
it selfishly, I would like him not to sign, because the Reds have said, hey, we'd love to have him back as a coach or a something or a special advisor. I would like to see that. I would like to see him come back and do that. I mean, players always think they've got 1 or 2 good years left. Maybe he does, but I'm very selfish. I hope he doesn't sign, because I'd like to see him come back and in some capacity with the Reds. Again, what we talked about, having a player with his whole career with one team, and how often does that happen? Not often.
Right.
I would love to see him come back and do that. So, but if he thinks he can play, if he's going to play, I hope he goes back to Toronto and plays for his hometown team.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would agree. Well, he was, I don't know that there's ever been a player that went from sort of this kind of shy, quiet, reserved guy to opening up and just being really funny. And, I just think his personality developed in a way that I don't know, maybe other guys did, and I wasn't paying attention, but I just feel like he just went from, one thing to another. And it's just been so much fun to watch. And
and to see him mature and to see him really talk about tough issues. I mean, you remember when his father passed away, and he struggled, and he wasn't shy about talking about it. Right. And you remember he had to step away for a bit. And I think that really helped open up the conversation among other athletes, because we think these are like big, rough, tough guys and nothing bothers them. And he really brought that to the forefront, that no, this is an issue and this is real. And I really admired that about him, that this was something that it wasn't popular to talk about, and he did.
And he did. Yep.
And he
that's
did.
For sure.
And he came back, and I think he was better and stronger than ever. And people liked him. They liked him as a leader. Kind of that Sean Casey type of a field leader that people just liked him.
Exactly.
They liked him not just as a ball player, but as a person, and what he did with that team and what he did in the community. I'm selfish. I hope he comes back as a special advisor or a coach or something. So,
Betsy, if our listeners Google your name after listening to this podcast, they might think you designed the American flag. You're the second most. I think you're the second most famous Betsy Ross in American history. So I'm just wondering if you were named after the original designer, I guess, of the American flag, the one with the 13 stars.
Right. Well, amazingly not. This was not necessarily, in my parents' head that, if it's a girl, we're going to name her, because I have an older sister. And so you would think that if they wanted a daughter named Betsy Ross, they would have named her, because, there's no guarantee there would have been a second one. So this was back in the days when you were in the hospital for 3 days after you gave birth. You got to be in the hospital for 3 days. And after 2.5 days, the nurse came into my mother and said, you got to name her something. You got to come up with a name. You can't call her, hey, you, the rest of her life. You got to come up with something. So they hadn't come up with a name. So somewhere in a baby book, they found Betsy. And then my middle name is Melina. And if it's pronounced the Greek way, it's Melina. There's nobody Greek in my family that we know of, but they just like the name, and they pronounce it Melinda, like Melinda without the D, Melina. So it's Betsy Melina. And so they finally came up with a name, and then the nurses said to my mother, well, do you want to stay the week? I mean, this is the last time you're going to be able to get sleep for a year or two. So you want to just stay here and sleep? And she said, sure. So she stayed in the hospital for a week. Can you imagine that happening today? No, that's not going to happen.
Right.
So, she stayed in the hospital for a week, got to sleep as much as she wants. She got, 3 squares every day. Meanwhile, my dad is taking care of my sister back home. And mom's like living the life there for a week. But it's, it's funny when I was a kid, of course, and people come up with, comments about my name, and I always said, I'm going to be, one of these days, I'm going to be so famous that people won't joke about my name. And one of my triumphs was actually talking about Bristol, Connecticut, and I was turning in a rental car or getting a rental car or something at the counter at the airport in Bristol or in Hartford, and the guy at the counter said, "Oh, are you the Betsy Ross that made the flag?" And I said, "No, I'm the Betsy Ross that anchors Sports Center."
Nice.
And
nice.
That's one of my best ones. I'm the Betsy Ross that anchors Sports Center. So and he just kind of looked at me like, what did she just say?
Yeah.
So that made me feel good.
Nice.
That's fantastic.
Well, we are bumping up on our time, Betsy, and we don't want to keep you longer than we promised. But it sure has been a lot of fun talking to you about your Reds fandom and some great memories. So,
well, thank you so much. Anytime I have an opportunity to talk sports, I'll do it. I was talking with Christine Brennan, the columnist for USA Today. I've known her for years, and she said, people come up to me all the time and say, "Where do you go to retire?" And she goes, "Why in the world would I retire? I am doing what I love. I'm covering the world. I travel everywhere." She's getting ready for her 21st consecutive Olympics. She said, and they want me to retire? They pay me to go to games. Are you kidding me? And and she's right. When you're doing something that you love, like sports, I mean, there's only so much golf to be played. I mean, it's just such a great field, and those of us who are involved, either as super fans like you all, or in the business, we're so fortunate to be involved in sports because there's nothing that brings a community together like sports does. Everybody's happy
Very true.
when they win. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thank you very much, Betsy.
Thank you, Bill.
And an ovation.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate your all's time. This was a lot of fun. Good luck with the ride.
Thank you.
Hometown's daddy, about Cincinnati. What a team, what a team, what a team. Each man and lady from 1 to 80, how they scream, how they scream, how they scream.